Hello and welcome to Big Picture Monday. My name is Cali Black, here with all the context you need to totally rock this week's Come Follow Me readings. This week we are studying one chapter from each of the books: Matthew 27, Mark 15, Luke 23, and John chapter 19. This week is a big one as we move into Friday of Holy Week, which I'm sure you may be familiar with, is often referred to as Good Friday. This is the day that Jesus is crucified. And we have a lot to read about and kind of digest this week. Real quick, this week is also the final week of the second quarter, meaning we start third quarter next week, which means time for new study guide. So my new study guide is available for July through September. If you like a physical book, you can head to Amazon. I'll include the link in the comments here if you're on YouTube, or in the link in my bio if you're on Instagram, or you can always comment and I'll send you links. Or if you like digital downloads, you can head to my website, comefollowmestudy.com. Every single week, I give you tons of bullet points with all the context you need, the same information that I give you in the videos. But then I also give you quick reference lists for who people are. If you're like, as we go through Acts and the epistles, if you're like, who is Paul? I feel like I should know who Paul is. I give you everything you could possibly want to know about Paul in a reasonable manner. We've got maps from the amazing Sarah at All of That Designs as well, with all of the travels going on in Acts and the epistles, spiritual guiding questions, chapter summaries, especially some of the chapters in Acts are all over the place, literally. And so I break it down with what you need to know about what happens in each chapter as well. Anyways, they're awesome, so helpful. I love being able to create them for you guys. Go ahead and grab those because you'll need them in 1 week. All right, let's talk about what is happening this week though, because this is the end of our Savior's mortal ministry. And as you read through some of this stuff, I'm not gonna lie, it can be tough to read, especially when we think of it like, this is happening to our friend, our Savior. I hope he's your friend. He's my friend. He really is. And especially these past 6 months, I've gotten to know him again, even better, as we've studied everything that we know about his mortal ministry on this continent at least. And to see what he had to endure physically just is heartbreaking, especially after we know what he endured in Gethsemane right beforehand. But here's my big takeaway from this week. Sometimes we want to skip to Sunday. We want to skip to Easter. We want to skip to the good stuff. And I think sometimes we just need to sit in Friday. And it needs to be sad. And it needs to be difficult. And it needs to be hard for a little bit. It was hard for the Savior of the world to endure what he had to endure. And I think sometimes in our lives, we're just kind of sitting on Fridays and there's some rough days and we want to be like hopeful and optimistic, and that will come. We will study that this next following week. But sometimes we just have to sit in Fridays, and Jesus can sit right alongside us because he knows what Fridays are like. A couple things that might help you as we talk about this. First of all, timing. You're going to see a few different differences in timing, but if we look at Matthew, Mark, and Luke's account, they all agree the timing of Friday. Now, remember, Jews started counting their days as when daylight begins. So for the sake of ease, and in fact, most people kind of agree with this, let's say that that is 6 a.m., okay? So if the day starts at 6 a.m., the third hour of the day would be 9 a.m. The sixth hour would be noon, so on and so forth, right? When we look at the events of Friday, we actually see that Jesus was crucified on Friday in the third hour of the day, which is 9 a.m. on Friday. Now, this means that all of the events with Pilate that we're going to read about happened prior to 9 a.m. so that he was nailed to the cross, initially nailed to the cross. Friday at 9 a.m. So a lot of the sham trials with Annas and Caiaphas we've talked about, and now Pilate, these are happening in the dark hours in between Thursday and Friday, and into the very wee hours of the morning so that we can get Jesus to Golgotha, nailed to the cross at 9 a.m. We do know that then there was darkness from around noon to 3 p.m. That's the 6th to the 9th hour of the days, and that Jesus died around the 9th hour, so 3 p.m. on Friday, which gives enough time for then some of the disciples to quickly get Jesus in a tomb with just like a little bit of preparation before the sun goes down so that they can then celebrate the Sabbath all on Saturday. And that with keeping in mind that on Sunday, they're going to go back. And in fact, the women are like, we will come back on Sunday and properly bury Jesus. But it gives them enough time to be able to do what they need to do on Friday before they have to leave him for the Sabbath. Now, a couple of people that I want to draw your attention to, because I feel like a lot of us are very familiar with the events of these chapters, but there's some people that you might want to be reminded of. The first is Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate was the Roman governor, so he's not Jewish. He is from the Romans who are overseeing the whole area of Judea at this time. He is kind of the transplant to keep things in check. He is the only person who can put people to death for like political or lawful reasons. And so the Jewish leadership come to Pilate and they're like, hey, we think that Jesus might cause an insurrection, and so he probably needs to be put to death. Now, of course, Pilate does not agree with this at all, but we also know that he gives into a lot of the pressure from the chief priests and the crowd as well to just be like, whatever, I wash my hands, you can crucify him. But that's Pilate's role in all this. They needed to have Pilate's permission if they were going to put Jesus to death for like a legal, political reason and not just a religious reason. Someone else you're going to want to know is Simon of Cyrene. Simon of Cyrene, we don't know much about him. He's just an interesting little person that we get a glimpse of. The only thing we know is that Cyrene is in Africa. So this individual is from Africa. It seems like his sons were well known, and we're going to see that he was tasked by the Roman leadership to help Jesus carry the cross to Golgotha. Now, from like other cultural hints at that time, that makes it seem like when Jesus got to the point when he physically could not carry the cross anymore, Simon of Cyrene stepped in to help out. Of course, forced to step in from Roman leadership, to be clear on that. We also have a whole bunch of women that we get to learn about in this chapter. Jesus was surrounded by women in the final day of his life. I'm sure he was surrounded by women many other times, but this is one of the only few accounts that we actually get of the women around him. Of course, we have Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene, he had previously met and cast 7 devils out of her, and she became a very devoted disciple from that moment on. We also have another Mary. That Mary is the mother of the apostle James the Younger. So there were 2 apostle James. This is not Peter, James, and John. It's not that James and John. It's the other James, James the Lesser, James the Younger. His mother is named Mary and is a very devoted disciple. We also then have Salome, who is the mother of James and John. She's the one who had asked Jesus, can my son sit on your right hand? We see her in these last moments. And then we also have Mary, the mother of Jesus, of course, being there. And to think about the significance of Mary being present at the birth and the death of her son. She is there. Mary is there. We also have a couple little hints of 2 men at the end. Joseph of Arimathea, we know that he would have been extremely wealthy in the Jewish leadership, and he secretly was a follower of Jesus. And so he uses his privilege. He has this beautiful tomb, and he says that they can bury Jesus in his tomb. And who goes with him? We learn that in John's account, Nicodemus goes with him. Remember Nicodemus? We've seen him 2 other short little times. And this, we now see Nicodemus going to help Joseph bury Jesus very quickly on that Friday evening before the sun goes down, using the spices and the strips of linen to give him the best burial that they could in those moments. I love it. Okay, let's talk about now specifically what we get in each of the different versions. These are all just one chapter covering like very similar events, so the differences are going to stand out a little bit more. Let's start with Matthew 27, since that's the first one that most of us read. This starts with the account of Judas, and we actually get the account of Judas immediately regretting his decision to betray Jesus. He returns the 30 pieces of silver, and he goes and hangs himself out of regret for what he does. We then see Jesus being taken to Pontius Pilate. We have Pilate trying to question Jesus. Jesus is not responding. And then Pilate goes to the crowd and says, I can release one prisoner. Should it be Jesus? Or should it be Barabbas? And the chief priests stir up the crowd to start saying it should be Jesus. Pilate says he washes his hands and allows Jesus to move forward with this process. Jesus is then scourged, tortured, and sent. He's mocked and then sent to Golgotha. He is then crucified on the cross. More people are mocked. More people are mocking Jesus while he is on the cross. Jesus cries out to God, and then he dies. We get record of the earth quaking, the veil of the temple being rent, being ripped. We then have Joseph of Arimathea going to Pilate, unprecedented move. Like, this is not something that you would do. You would not go to the Roman leader and ask to bury a prisoner, but he asks for Jesus's body. Pilate gives him the permission. Joseph puts him in the tomb. Now, at the same time, some of the Jewish leadership is starting to get a little suspicious because they know that his believers think that he will rise from the dead. And so they say, we need to put some soldiers to guard the tomb to make sure nothing tricky is going on. And that's where we leave off in Matthew's account. All right, to Mark's account, chapter 15, I'll go through some of the similarities pretty quickly here. We start off with his going to Pilate. Jesus isn't responding. Pilate says he can release a prisoner, and everyone still wants Jesus. Jesus is scourged, smitten, mocked, and then he's crucified. Here's where we learn he's crucified between two thieves. He's mocked further on the cross. This is when he says, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And then Jesus dies, and the veil of the temple is rent, and Joseph buries Jesus in his tomb. All right, Luke's account. Luke is always a little bit different, right? Because he's looking for some more human-focused sides of Jesus as we go through this process. And we get a couple other details that are interesting in Luke. So first, we start with Jesus going to Pilate. Pilate doesn't find any fault in Jesus. And here's an interesting detail. In Luke's account, Pilate then sends Joseph to go see Jesus. Pilate sends Jesus to go see Herod, the ruler Herod, who happens to be in town for Passover. Remember, it's Passover time. And so Jesus is in town, and Herod's in town, and Pilate sends Jesus off to go see Herod, trying to move it over to Herod's jurisdiction. You deal with him. Herod has a little back and forth with Jesus. It seems like he's really excited to see Jesus at first because he wants Jesus to do some miracles, and Jesus is not really responding. He knows what's going to happen. Herod sends Jesus back to Pilate, and Pilate, at the urging of the crowd, decides to send Jesus off to be scourged and sent to Golgotha. Now, on Golgotha, this is when Jesus asks for forgiveness for the people around him because they know not what they do. And then one of the men who's being crucified asks Jesus for forgiveness while he's on the cross, and Jesus gives that to him. Jesus then dies, and after he dies, one of the centurions who's watching, the Roman soldiers, one of these soldiers testifies that Jesus was the Christ. He was the Messiah. And then we have Joseph putting Jesus in his tomb, and then we have the women going to rest, knowing that they'll come back on Sunday. Okay, last one, John chapter 19. We know John's accounts are always a little bit different. And in John 18, we'd already read with the encounter with Pilate. So we pick up with the scourging of Jesus, the crown of thorns being placed on his head, Jesus being sent to Golgotha, and asking John to take care of his mother Mary while he's on the cross by saying, behold thy mother. And John agrees to that. Jesus is given vinegar to drink, and he says, it is finished, and then dies. A soldier then pierces Jesus's side with his spear. That's very important. It fulfills prophecy. And so that's important to take note of. And then we have the account of Joseph and Nicodemus taking Jesus's body and burying it in the tomb. All right, that is what we're studying this week. Kind of a lot of heavy stuff, but like I said, I think there's power to sitting in some of that sadness of Friday. For my personal spiritual focus question, I love when Jesus says to John, behold thy mother. And I think that Jesus wanted his mother taken care of, his earthly mother taken care of. And how often, though, does he ask us to take care of his other family members here on earth when he can't physically be here with us anymore? And he's saying, behold thy friend, behold thy neighbor, behold thy children, and he's asking us to take charge of them. And so I want to examine that responsibility a little more this week. And in fact, I'll have a post coming up on that. All right, have a great week this week and happy studying.